This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 9, Episode 26. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, brought to you by HK. Today is Thursday, February 22nd, as of the recording of this episode, and I'm here with co-host and producer Brian Doc McLaughlin. Welcome, sir.
Thanks for having me.
And, of course, I'm your host, Riley Bowman, as well. Glad to be a part of this show with you today. We're going to be on a tight schedule, just so everybody knows, just due to scheduling stuff. But we're here, and today's episode is our news and we call it our industry news and legislative updates episode. Today's going to be a little bit more heavily focused on legislative news because there's a lot of that going on, and actually going through everything legislatively. There's so much we don't even have the time to talk about all of that in today's episode. We try to choose the best stuff that we can, the stuff that's most relevant we feel to our listeners, and also a variety of things as well, covering both on the national front, but also in various state and other local jurisdictions too. We got a lot of state news today. We got things we're going to be talking about from Minnesota, Colorado, Hawaii, and a number of other places. So anyway, should be a good episode. Stay tuned. Please share and like and subscribe and do all the things. We appreciate your support of the podcast that makes this possible. And, of course, you're always welcome to hit us up on our email. Our podcast hotline is podcast@concealedcarry.com. We'd love to hear from our listeners. So today's episode, though, first of all, is sponsored by CCW Safe. CCW Safe is our choice for self-defense legal coverage. Check them out today. You can go right to ccwsafe.com. You can see all the different plan options available. You can see exactly what they cover. Frankly, we wouldn't be partnered up with them if we didn't think they were the best. I've had coverage through several of their other competitors, and CCW Safe is where I've landed. All right, so please consider giving them a look and supporting them. We appreciate their support of the podcast. And also today's episode sponsored by KSG Armory Holsters. If you guys, you got a holster right there on display. Those of you that are watching live or watching the replay, this is the Lexington holster. Brian, why don't you actually just share real quick? I mean, what are your thoughts and like what do you like essentially about the way we do things at KSG Armory Holsters?
Real quick, my voice is a little jacked up, so if I'm coming in a little rough on your end there, I'm getting over a sickness, so just bear with me. But I think one of the things I like the most about the KSG Armory is how well thought out the product is. There is a substantial number of upgrades that you can have on this holster, and it's produced and made by the same people who are carrying this exact holster. So we're always tweaking things and making things a little bit better through our research and development and that kind of stuff. So I love the KSG Armory because it's very well thought out.
Yeah, right on, man. Right on, man. Hey, real quick pause. Yeah. All right, cool. We were just picking up the noise of your beard.
My beard.
It was like,
yeah.
And I know the comments I'm going to hear from listeners is going to be, it was a great episode, but I couldn't get past the for, an hour long. But anyway, all right, here we go. So I appreciate you sharing those thoughts about KSG Armory, Brian. We have worked really hard to think that product out and to make it super adaptable and adjustable for the end user. And so seriously, it means a lot to hear you express that opinion as well. KSGArmory.com's website. Check them out. Appreciate your support. Let's get into our first stories. What do you say?
Let's do it.
So first up, actually, the title of this episode is Which Country is Building Over 300 New Gun Ranges? And it's not the US of A, which is, I think, unfortunate. I mean, I swear everywhere I look, Brian, that I'm seeing ranges that get shut down more. It seems more often than new ones being built. That might not be necessarily true. That's anecdotal, obviously. I mean, I know of some new ranges being built Like I know, for instance, right now, like Staccato with their Staccato Ranch, I think it's kind of already built, but they're continuing to build onto that down in Texas, and the place they're hosting Carry Optics Nationals for the second time out in near Columbus, Ohio, in June, where I'll be shooting and competing. Same thing there, the Cardinal Range facility they've built on and added to that and made improvements. But at the same time, there's ranges here in our local area in Colorado just in the last few years that I've seen kind of, go away or be, a lot more restricted. And so what country is actually now suddenly making this huge push to expand their shooting ranges, and why? And that country is Finland.
And the why is pretty interesting.
It is pretty interesting. I think that those of you that pay attention a little bit more to kind of geopolitics and whatnot, probably it's no surprise to you. But Finland is super concerned about things going on in their little corner of the world. You got the war still ongoing with Russia, the Ukraine. Finland is right there. I mean, their next door neighbor is Russia, and because of their concerns there, keep in mind this is not just building like military or law enforcement shooting ranges. This is building ranges for. They want the general public. They want to create again a culture of shooting amongst their general populace in Finland. They see that as being a good thing, that it should actually help raise their standards for their whole country, including their military. They're also making some interesting changes with their military, including allowing now diabetics to join the army, and they're making a big push to get more women joining the army as well. All of this seems to be geared towards, what if, and if Russia starts being more aggressive towards our homeland of Finland.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things here is that it doesn't seem like they're promoting training. They're not, doesn't sound like, I mean, if they're just building ranges, it doesn't sound like they are promoting combat shooting. Like they're not promoting their civilians wearing chest rigs, carrying assault rifles and combat shooting. So I think what's interesting here is that if they're building the ranges, it seems like they're more interested in promoting accuracy, which would be a much better use of the civilian population if they just had deer rifles and they were to turn in most of the population into snipers. That would be the most effective way of utilizing the civilian population to fight in a whatever invasion force. Pretty often you see a lot of people in the gun community, working very hard at AR and pistol transitions and combat shooting and room clearing and all that kind of stuff. That is a very, very dangerous thing that you have to spend a lot of time learning and also staying on top of. So if it comes to that type of an invasion force in your country, the civilian population is always going to be much better off as civilian snipers, because you only need one person with a deer rifle and knows what they're doing to shut down an entire unit of the military. And if you have a spotter who is able to get in there and help you get out, even better. You got a team of two, you can be devastating on the battlefield. Whereas close quarter battles, a lot of these bubbas out there that are showing you on Instagram, the running and gunning and that kind of stuff, I get it. It's super cool, but you're going to be far more effective as a sniper in some sort of a situation like that than you will be a door kicker.
I think it's an interesting perspective. And what I see here is there was quoted in another part of this article, which, by the way, the article referencing is from ammoland.com. Of course, we always appreciate the excellent journalism they do over at Ammoland. This one was written by Dean Weingarten, who I'm a big fan of. We've shared a number of his articles over the years. It references them seeing increasing marksmanship as being key. And I can totally understand that, because especially like, I think part of the thinking is, beyond having a general armed populace, but you're going to be pulling from that populace, especially from the younger folks, into your ranks. And if they come up through, their childhood, their youth, in this culture of learning to shoot, learning to have good marksmanship, that is so much easier to work with from a training side of things once they're actually in the military, because the fundamentals of just being able to line up a shot, hold the gun steady and fire it, I mean, that's sometimes, that's sometimes the more difficult thing to teach, especially when you have a lot of people to push through
Mhm.
training, like you would say in like a, boot camp or whatever. I don't know what they call it there, but you know what I mean? That you don't always get a lot of time to spend one-on-one with shooters in training environments like that, in large group training. And so I think this is an excellent foundation to help encourage and get a lot of their citizens, to have a higher standard of marksmanship, and to just get more of them involved in general. Like, one of the reasons people, like, it's a top reason I hear from folks, even here in the U.S., when it's like, hey, so how come you don't do more training, or how come you don't get to the range more often? And it's not uncommon to hear, well, it's difficult to do, or it's out of my way, or it becomes a whole day affair, because depending on where you live, sometimes finding a place to shoot is not always the most convenient.
Absolutely.
So having more opportunities is a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, familiarity. If they
Yep.
come up, they're already familiar with a weapon system, gun safety rules and that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. It's going to be a lot easier to train them up.
Yeah. So pretty cool to see a whole nation kind of get behind an idea of
Necessity,
yeah.
because they are worried right now. I mean,
Yeah.
things are a little rough over there.
I think it's a good lesson to us here in the US that, like, it's so easy for us to get comfortable where we are and to think that we're this superpower, which I mean we are, but what's better, being ready ahead of time or having to react to changes in the world? Uh, you know, I think the trend where we are at is not necessarily always the best trend, as far as seeing an attack against the Second Amendment, seeing an attack on citizen ownership of firearms. We're going to talk about some of that legislatively here today. I mean, one of those, we were connecting just before the show about how we grew up similarly. We'll get to that, and I was shocked when I read that in that it's actually a thing out of Minnesota. So we'll come back to that. So we better keep moving along here, though. Next story from the firearmblog.com. United States Special Operations Command chooses the Speer Gold Dot G2. It doesn't specify exact caliber, but the image of the article is a 9mm box of Speer G2 Gold Dot ammo. Kind of an interesting, noteworthy thing. That's why it's included in our industry news segment of the podcast here today, because I mean, this is a major contract from US SOCOM saying we're going to buy 8.5 million rounds of Speer Gold Dot G2 bullets, which of course Speer is a part of the Vista conglomerate, which is like Federal and Speer and American Eagle and some of those brands you guys would know. The Gold Dot is an old, I mean, at this point, a couple decades old technology, but still a very good bullet. And a couple years ago, they redesigned that and created the G2, which is a little bit more geared towards law enforcement purposes, and apparently now military. In that US SOCOM will be fielding their pistols with G2 Gold Dot bullets.
This makes a lot of sense. Your standard military units, they're carrying ball ammo. And you don't get a whole lot of energy dump into the tissue like you're going to get with your hollow points. So over penetration is obviously going to be a much more serious thing for your special operators and that kind of stuff. So making sure that bullet doesn't punch all the way through or limits the opportunity for that to happen, that's going to be an essential part of their tactics, I'm guessing, because you're going to be in hostage situations and very dicey areas, whereas your normal troops aren't going to be. And I'm guessing that's the primary disconnect there.
Yeah. It's just a comment from me, and having talked with trusted ballistics experts like Chuck Haggard and a few others about such things. Lest anyone, I mean, I'm not going to steer anybody away necessarily from going out and buying Gold Dot G2s to be your personal defense load or anything like that, because it is a good bullet that performed and passes FBI testing standards. So there's no question about that. But you should know that it is designed to be. It's really intended to do well. It's like a jack of all trades. So it's meant to give you pretty decent expansion through a variety of materials. So you're talking not just, clothing or denim, but also, plywood and drywall and metal and glass and things like that. And it's just important as we're thinking of choosing ammunition that we're going to use for our personal defense, that we are mindful of the context that we're most likely to be using that in. It's far more common for, say, like law enforcement to have to shoot through glass or through the metal, panels of a vehicle. A little bit less of a contextual thing for most citizens' use of deadly force in self-defense. But so I think that probably and I'm literally saying, I'm sharing exactly how I feel about this and my own thinking of this. I'm much more happy just to use like Federal HST or the traditional Spirit Gold Dot ammunition for my uses, because I don't, which those also do okay through a lot of those same barriers. They still pass the same FBI's testing standards. Just know that you're going to tend to get a little bit less expansion out of the Spirit Gold Dot G2 than you would of the traditional Gold Dot.
And that's intentional.
It's intentional. The way it's designed, it's a little bit of a hardier bullet so that it does better through, and particularly through like glass. Auto glass, I know, is one thing. It was a major consideration in designing the G2. But anyway, just a little bit of commentary there, some things to keep in mind, because like sometimes people will see stuff like this, like, hey, well, it's good enough for the US SOCOM, it's good enough for me,
right?
And that's not necessarily wrong per se, but understand the military is considering needs that are different than our needs.
This is an argument I use a lot in trauma medicine. A lot of people are like, this is what the military does. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. Trust me, I get that. But we're not the military anymore. We have a different area of operation. We have different procedures and protocols here as civilians. So we have to keep that in mind.
Yep. Awesome. Appreciate your adding in on that as well. Let's turn now to some legislative news. Okay. So we didn't have much in the way of, there's other things we could have pulled from, and so industry news or even new product releases, a lot of that hype is kind of in the past with SHOT Show and things like that. So the rest of what we're going to focus on is some legislative news here. The first thing is actually out of our home state here of Colorado, which we've been following, we've been tracking. The last time we did this, we mentioned that there's some things coming. Super duper concerned about what they are looking to achieve on the gun control front in Colorado. And this is one specifically that I've been really harping on, super concerned about, because House Bill 24-1310 is intended to revise schools. They're calling it, a school safety bill. And really what they mean by that is they're looking to take away the option for school districts to assign and train school staff to be armed security on the premises. That's been a thing for over 2 decades now, over 20 years. Since the last time concealed carry law was significantly revised in Colorado, it was actually put into the law at that time that, hey, school districts that want to have the option to have trained, armed school staff carrying a firearm on their person on school grounds, that's an option. You can do that. I think that's a reasonable approach for schools to take. And it's especially important, I think, to have that option available for particularly school districts in Colorado that are very rural, which there are a bunch. Just imagine Kit Carson County, right, as an example, way out in the middle of the grasslands in eastern Colorado, very low population, far from services, especially good services. If you need level 1 trauma support, you got to go a good ways to get that help. You might be far enough away. Your school might be far enough away from responding law enforcement, right? Because you're probably more at the mercy of a county sheriff's office to respond. Some of those areas don't have the resources that like we have. We're more in the metro area here. For instance, my kids, especially the high school that 2 of my kids attend, they have a full-time school resource officer assigned there. Yep. All right, cool. Sounds good. My daughter that goes to the middle school doesn't have a full-time resource officer there, but is there at least half the time. Like to see that honestly more often in my opinion, but that's how they do it. So but the fact is we have resource officers assigned to schools and assigned within school districts here more in the metro area. It's not always possible to do in some of those more rural areas. So this bill would remove that option. And if you want to have an armed security in your school, it basically has to be a sworn law enforcement officer. This is a step in the wrong direction for Colorado because like they call it a school safety bill. But understand, by the way, this article is also from MLN.com. It's actually written by Laura Carno, who's a local friend of mine. She works for Faster Colorado, a great nonprofit organization that the whole purpose of is to train school staff that have this assignment of being armed staff on school grounds. And they do a marvelous job with that. And they're looking at taking that all away.
Well, now you might know more about this topic than I do, but let me play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Please.
So, when I think about training,
mm-hmm.
and when I think about the types of people that I tend to see in my classes and that kind of thing, it really worries me to have somebody who is a well-meaning teacher, even though they've been trained, like what is the level of that training? Like this isn't here to the level of a police officer, but one of the most important parts about a lot of combat is experience. So
Sure.
handling a situation, I would much prefer to have an experienced police officer who's also well trained watching over my kids as opposed to a teacher who just went through a course. Personally, I feel like there's a significant amount of extra risk when it comes to just a teacher who's taken a course and maybe passed all the qualifications tests, but hasn't actually put that to any kind of test in a real world situation. So I could see where that argument could be valid in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to, like if I want somebody watching my kids, I would prefer to have a seasoned police officer.
Sure. So, to respond to your devil's advocate question, I would say, you really needed to look into this Faster program
Mhm.
that they put these teachers through in this training, because I can't remember exactly how many hours, but it's not insignificant, and it's not just shooting, but they also do force on force training, very realistic, like in a school type environment, and so they're teaching about the realities of what it means to be armed and carrying a gun on school grounds and having to deal with a very dynamic situation of we're in a school setting, we may have kids and innocents all over the place, and we're trying to deal with a threat. I think that it's to the other thing I'd say to that, Brian, is the alternative I don't think is, the alternative is, okay, then you don't have anybody on scene,
right?
That can respond. Because ultimately what saves lives in an active shooter event is the speed of response. And there's nothing faster than somebody that's responding that's actually already on scene. And and it doesn't always even have to be, I'm not saying, like, obviously we should plan for the worst in our approach, in our mindset, in our training, right? But a lot of times even just some show of force is enough to stop that attack from proceeding, right?
Traditionally, one of the most important parts about an active shooter situation is getting someone there to put a obstacle in the way of the shooter. Even something just as somebody saying, "Hey, stop," has been enough to make that shooter off himself.
Yes,
So that
exactly.
happens all the time. So
Exactly.
absolutely, that's a 100%. And I don't think that like it should be a community decided. Like here they have the Colorado government is saying like this is mandated across the board,
right.
And that should not be allowed.
And that's
because
what I'm saying here.
they have schools that have resources that can handle that, and they've got rural schools, like you're saying, who don't have the type of capital or the funds to be able to put that up there. And like you said, something is better than nothing. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the point here, is this law, as we've had it for the last 2 decades, it puts the individual school districts in the driver's seat. That's a lot more local control than a state mandate, right? Because exactly, because then that school board and parents that are concerned, if a school district is looking at implementing an armed school staff program in your school, you have the option of being able to show up to a school board meeting and express your concern. And so that's the whole point here, is having the option. I think this is a good thing in the law that they want to pass. Again, it's House Bill 24-1310, sponsored by anti-gunners Eliza Hamrick and Jennifer Parenti. This is a step in the wrong direction.
I think if they're going to mandate this, I think they should have resources in place to pay for schools that cannot afford their own resource officer.
That would be reasonable, but I don't think that's where they're going.
And if they don't allow that, then they should have the option to have harm teachers if they can't afford a resource officer.
Agreed. Yeah, just a little anecdote. And this is another thing that I like to point out when people. I engaged with somebody actually when I was a part of our school district's safety and security committee. It was a special committee a couple years ago to come up with recommendations for our school board on steps to take in our school district to make things safer and more secure, right? That was a cool process to be a part of. And I had a number of opportunities to engage in some conversations with people, including those that did not see eye to eye with me. And I remember seeing this slight change in the expression of someone when we were it wasn't so much a debate, but we were definitely having a discussion about the idea of armed staff in schools. And I said, what's interesting is a case study out of Utah, where in Utah, in public schools, not just teachers, but adults that have a concealed carry permit in Utah can carry on school grounds. I'm like, did you know that? And they're like, no. Did you know there's been I can't even think of a single incident, like a bad incident, because of that being an option? Like, as far as somebody, a kid gets a hold of a gun, and uses it, or, an adult makes a mistake and, gets somebody shot or whatever. Like, they've had that in Utah for over 2 decades now as well. And there's basically zero evidence that would suggest that that's a bad thing, just having armed law-abiding Americans on school campuses. But anyway, what do I know?
Well, like you said, one of the most important parts is providing that obstacle for the active shooter. To resist them in any way is going to be beneficial.
Yeah. Yep. Minnesota Governor, I think it's Governor Walz. Is that right? Anyway, Walz pushes legislature to expand Minnesota's safe storage laws for firearms after 3 first responders slain in Burnsville. You were the one that shared this story, so why don't you give us a rundown on this?
Okay, yeah, let me pull that up. I was looking at something else here.
Well, while you're pulling it up. So this was just this last weekend, by the way. I remember seeing this report in the news. You had 3 first responders. Actually, I think there was 2 officers and I think like an EMT or a paramedic, which is, that's kind of rare and super, super unfortunate. I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say it this way, but we're kind of used to cops because it's, sort of an inherent risk of their job of cops getting shot responding to difficult situations. But EMTs and paramedics and the like, that's kind of a rare event. So over the weekend, 2 officers shot, killed, and a EMT shot and killed as they were responding to, I think it started out as a domestic event, turned into a barricaded situation. So why don't you take it from there? I gave the background.
Yeah, the story I've got pulled up says it was 3 slain first responders. So that's going to be your EMTs or paramedics, either one of those. And then 1 officer was also injured, but he's been released from the hospital since then. So according to the story, a man who shall not be named barricaded himself in his home with his girlfriend and 7 children. He had been barred from possessing weapons because he had a conviction back in 2008. So he wasn't allowed to have the guns, had them anyway. And so they went in to go get him, and he wound up killing 3 dudes and hurting another officer. So this is something that I actually talk about quite a bit over on Mountain Man Medical, the YouTube channel. One of the things that I'm always talking about is like how to stay safe in an emergency situation as a medic. A lot of times medics don't anticipate that they're going to be in the line of fire or that they might have an aggressive patient. Pretty often people are like, well, here, I'm just here to help this person. I'm not at a risk. You are at a huge risk as a medic. So knowing how to fight, familiarization with weapons is important because you might need to pick one up and defend yourself. And then also having basic grappling and fighting skills so that you can get yourself away from an attacker is essential. So if you are out there, you are an EMT or a paramedic, and you're listening to this podcast, I would go get some training. I mean, obviously you're listening to this podcast. You're probably thinking along those lines. But if you know somebody, tell them you got to go get some training so that you can get this done. So this law or this event put into place a knee-jerk reaction, of course. And so now we have Walz, who is a Governor Tim Walz, says that they need to put some better restrictions enforced for a red law flag so that they can keep guns away from this particular situation. And it was your opinion that you didn't think that the red flag law would have helped here, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of details we don't know about this incident, right? But what we've seen in other similar cases is, let me give you an example. Okay, so in this one, they're talking about, as part of this law is to add restrictions to increase their red flag law, to make that a more strict law in the state of Minnesota. The other thing is he wants to go after regulating ghost guns and basically anything that they can to make it more difficult for prohibited persons to come into possession of a gun. And I mean, here's the thing. So, I don't know where this guy exactly got his gun. I think that a lot of that perhaps is still being investigated. I haven't seen any updates to this, but in the last couple of days, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. He's a prohibited person, but he has a significant other, his girlfriend. She may not be a prohibited person, right? And so, she may have bought and may have owned guns, and thereby, they live together, so he gets a hold of them. I mean, like, what are you going to do about that? Like, legitimately, what are you going to do? What would have prevented this from happening? Obviously, this guy was having some kind of domestic and mental health related situation, to get to that level of distress, to barricade yourself with your family, with all these kids, and to engage in a shootout with not just cops but with EMTs. I mean, this is someone that is not in a good place, right? So that makes sense. My point is that aren't they just going to get a hold of guns some other way? We can try to legislate our way to prevent this as much as we want, but the fact is he's already a prohibited person. He likely knows that. He came into possession of guns. We don't know exactly how. He did that knowingly, breaking the law. So what's to prevent, even though you have a law prohibiting this or prohibiting that? I've not seen where anything that we could do would significantly reduce the risk for these kinds of events to occur. It just is just a thing, and it gets, again, and that's why I brought up the whole, having a significant other part of the equation, because what do you do there? Because they're not prohibited, so you're always going to have that door cracked open where you're not a prohibited person, but you live with someone who is. You're allowed to exercise your Second Amendment rights. And yeah, you could, try to keep those guns secured away from your significant other that is a prohibited person. But, if they care enough, they can gain access to your stuff, because that's just what people do.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Right. So anyway, Keep your eye on things in Minnesota. In fact, we have another story out of Minnesota. That's the next one right here. So a couple of things on the docket for the state legislature in Minnesota. This one, as reported on the firearmblog.com, Minnesota lawmakers ponder rimfire tube mag restrictions under assault weapons ban. This is a whole new level from what I've seen. So typically, Brian, we see assault weapons bans, that have been pushed and even passed in, certain states, say Illinois, for example, or California's, there's been some of that. And of course, New York and a few other states, right? Typically, though, your 22 caliber rifles, including those with tube magazines, have been exempted from a lot of that. And so what's interesting about this law out of Minnesota, I'm not sure if I have a bill number on that, so you can go reference. Oh, here it is. It says it's part of House File 3570, which is currently before the state's House Committee on Public Safety, Finance, and Policy. They are recommending for passage a long list of rifles that are banned by name and anything else that's like them. I love that open-ended, like, hey, these specific things are banned, and if anything else is like that, it's also banned. We can't say exactly what those things are, but
yeah, open-ended laws have always been good.
Yeah, it's
for civilians.
It's a great plan. But what's curious is they call out in this the following. So a semi-automatic rifle, it cannot have a detachable magazine that also has a pistol grip or thumb hole stock or a protruding grip that can be held by the non-trigger hand. So like a foregrip. A semi-automatic rifle that accepts a detachable magazine and also has a folding or telescopic stock. I love that one. That's one of my favorites because, a telescopic stock, automatically it's bad.
It improves the lethality significantly.
Hit damage +5.
Yeah.
Semi-auto rifle that has a fixed magazine that has the capacity to accept more than 10 rounds of ammunition. And this is where we get into the next piece. Oh, wait, hold on. That's further down. It says, hold on. I think I'm misreading that. Yeah, they call out further down below. Some Ruger 1022 models, the Marlin Model 60, a Browning SA22, Savage 87, and almost any other 22 auto loader with a tube mag. Because it's just saying it has a fixed magazine that has a capacity to accept more than 10 rounds. That's where they're lumping that in. That's what it is. So, like my Marlin 60, I grew up shooting that a bunch.
Same.
And this is what we were talking about before the show.
Well, it says right here in the article, it says the classic 22 long rifle with a long tube magazine is a standard feature in rural American households. Millions of farm boys started their shooting careers with the Marlin Model 60. Like I ran around the woods out here in the plains of Colorado with my Marlin 60, and I was a dead eye, a crack shot with that. I went through so many bricks of 22 ammo. Yeah, That's how I started.
Yep, they're great rifles.
Great rifles.
I still own my Model 60.
Yep, I've got 3
OG models, Marlin 60, and I remember for the longest time, like I think it's advertised as being able to hold 13 rounds, but I always found you could hold, you could put 14 in there. Yeah, and so, well, it's clearly more than 10 rounds, and that's what this law is going after: is anything that has a fixed magazine that's more than 10 rounds. So that's going to include these tube mags, including in these 22 caliber rifles, which is a number of them like that. So anyway, this is going to somehow make the state of Minnesota safer as well. There you go.
There are so many farm boys in Minnesota who are going to be so pissed about this.
That's why we bring this to your attention, folks, though. Especially if you're in Minnesota right now, here's at least 2 laws that you're going to want to be contacting your representatives, your senators, your leaders, and letting them hear from you. Same with those of you here in Colorado. I'm already sending the letters, writing my folks, trying to do what I can here locally. So we got to be doing that, though. All right. We got to be having these conversations, these discussions. We got to be talking to our neighbors. We got to be, like I was talking to one of my neighbors the other day, and we don't necessarily talk about gun stuff all the time, but I know that he's not like the biggest gun guy, but I know that he likes guns, and then he owns a couple, and it's like, hey man, you should know about a couple of things, because average people which a lot of average people are, they own guns or they like guns, but they're not in, you're here listening or watching this podcast, you're not average, you're not, because this is something you actually care about, that you're passionate about, that's like, you see it as being a part of your life in some way. But for a huge chunk of Americans, it's not. And they're not even paying attention a lot of times.
Mm.
So a lot of times I remember having the conversation last year with someone, because, we had the law get passed here in Colorado last year, that now I think it was as of October 1st, 2023, you now have this 3-day waiting period on a background check / gun purchase. You go in, you're like, I want to buy that. You buy it, you pay all the money, you do the background check, and then you got to come back 3 days later just to pick up the stupid thing. I got a friend that's going through it right now in Maryland, where I think they have a 10-day waiting period on gun purchases. So that got passed last year in Colorado, and I had that conversation with somebody at church that had no idea. And it's like, we gotta be talking to our neighbors, talking to our friends, talking to our family, because sometimes our family members don't even know, because they're just not paying attention to this stuff like we are. And next thing you know, laws are passed and they had no clue. We got to get more people involved and more people paying attention.
Yeah, we got to spread the word.
Yeah. And then we're not done, guys, because we have one. This is not necessarily a legislative matter that, that we can necessarily do anything about, but we want you to be aware of it. This one, I saw this pop up over the weekend, and it was kind of like, woof, this is wild to me. Hawaii justices. So Hawaii's state Supreme Court basically flipped the bird at the U.S. Supreme Court. The title of the article on MLN.com, Hawaii justices declare war on U.S. Supreme Court to the cheers of anti-gun media. So basically, you had this court case going on involving a man by the name of Christopher Wilson over there in Hawaii. It says here, he invoked the Second Amendment and Hawaii's constitutional right to arms with wording identical to the Second Amendment in his defense. He prevailed on these claims in the lower court, it says, and the state appealed to the Hawaii Supreme Court. There, the court disparaged Wilson's federally guaranteed right to bear arms and denied him standing to challenge the state's license to carry law, even though the state illegally refused to issue licenses during the relevant time period. In doing so, the court openly mocked the U.S. Supreme Court's Second Amendment jurisprudence, because they are the overarching law of the land as far as where it comes to matters of interpretation of constitutional rights, which the Second Amendment is. And they basically said, sorry, tough beans. This is how we do it in Hawaii now. I remember seeing over the weekend, there was talk about how their feeling in Hawaii is that there isn't, how did they word it? I don't know if it states it here in this article, but they basically were talking about how there's not like a precedent in Hawaii for self-defense or something to that extent, like maybe there is here in the States, or a precedent to right to bear arms. And it's like, well, whether that's true or not, which I don't think is true at all, because Hawaii hasn't exactly always had the most. They were trying to look at it from a historical precedent, that, well, we didn't always have a right to bear arms in Hawaii. And I'm like, okay, go look back in history. And Hawaii has not always been a peaceful, island nation. There's definitely been times where, they may not have been bearing, say, rifles and pistols, but right to bear arms is right to bear arms. Anyway, they're giving the middle finger to the U.S. Supreme Court with their ruling on this law. It'll be curious to see how this shakes out.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine how this is going to. I'm surprised he prevailed in the court and it went to the Supreme Court anyway. I would have assumed they just would have stomped him down there, but it looks like they're going to hold him accountable anyway, even though the Supreme Court says that he shouldn't be. Pursued.
And to be clear, I don't think we laid out the story of what happened. He was carrying a gun for personal protection while on a hike, and he got arrested. And the charges were felony charges under state laws that confine the possession of guns to one's own home. And that's what was being challenged here, in case that wasn't clear. I meant to give that background information. And so, yeah, exactly right. Like, because the state Supreme Court in Hawaii did not support his side of the case. I mean, he's going to have to keep fighting that, of course. But and I do hope that this will go to the U.S. Supreme Court, because this is unacceptable to have a state Supreme Court, basically trampling over the Second Amendment, which, again, it's the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, that has jurisprudence. That means they have, like, that's their area of. I mean, it's one thing. I mean, so a state Supreme Court is going to be involved in a matter of, like, state constitutional issues. And essentially what Hawaii State Supreme Court is saying here is that, well, our state constitution means something different than the federal constitution. But guess what takes precedence on such matters?
Yeah.
So, and you can also read the Hawaii State the Hawaii State Constitution and certainly interpret it differently than how this state Supreme Court has interpreted it. But anyway, pretty wild stuff there. We'll see how it sorts out. Like I said, South Carolina, it's far from being a done deal, but while we have anti-gun measures trying to get passed in Colorado and Minnesota and other places, and I think even the state of Washington has some we didn't have time, we felt like, to include some stuff from a few other states. We'll try to get some of that next time. But while there are some states trying to make things worse on gun owners and for the Second Amendment, you got states like South Carolina trying to pass constitutional carry. It's remarkable to me. You're just seeing such a wide polarization between some states that are making a hard left turn and other states that are, they're going right. They're going the opposite direction. And so South Carolina House Bill 3594 working its way through the House and the Senate. I believe it's been so it's passed in the House and the Senate's got the bill, but the majority leader in the Senate wants some amendments added to this bill. So it's not quite a for sure done deal. Don't know exactly what that's going to look like when it's all said and done. Interestingly enough, the governor of South Carolina, that would be Governor Henry McMaster, he indicated in the beginning, as they were going down this path of constitutional carry law, he said, "I'll sign the bill, no problem. I'm in support." Seems like he's backtracking a little bit on that, which I think is unfortunate. In fact, he issued a statement saying essentially that he seems to indicate some concern about illegal gun use and possession, seeming to imply that by having a constitutional carry law on the books, it's one less thing they can throw at somebody that is maybe charged with other crimes. And this is how we end up with a lot of laws, actually, is like, okay, somebody gets arrested for this thing, and so they're technically a criminal at this point, right? And so now it's like, what else can we throw at them? And having a concealed carry law, meaning a permit's required on the books, means we can also nab them for illegal possession or carrying or concealment of a weapon or whatever. And so it seems that Governor McMaster is suggesting that, I think he's feeling like having a law where a permit or something is required is a good thing from being able to really come after, criminals.
I don't understand this thought process or this logic. So they want to institute constitutional carry, which doesn't make it a crime to carry concealed as long as you're not committing a crime, right, or as long as you're not in possession of an illegal weapon. So it's already illegal.
Right.
So his problem now is that they need to make it more illegal.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So they need to have stricter penalties for this illegal thing that you're already going to get in trouble for.
Yeah.
So I don't see how that applies to constitutional carry at all. I'm not a lawyer, but that makes no logical sense in my mind.
That's my point. But that's what he said. And he said, the public is losing confidence. So am I, as far as in this bill. there's still a lot of feeling that this is going to make its way through and get passed ultimately, and presumably signed, but it may look a little bit different than, maybe some special conditions or something, associated with their version of this constitutional carry law. So not a for sure done deal. Something to keep an eye on. If you guys are in South Carolina, good idea to write your folks, your leaders, let them know where you stand on this.
It says here, it says, this is how we keep career criminals behind bars and now not out on bond, shooting and killing innocent South Carolinians. I mean, they're already illegal.
That's what bothers me about such things is, like, I understand wanting to have laws on the books that we can then throw at someone that's already committed a crime, so we can put them away longer, because they're a known violent offender or whatever it is. But this is at the cost of impacting law-abiding citizens' rights. So it's like, guess what? We're going to take that privilege away from you, meaning the privilege of carrying, if you're law-abiding, carrying without a permit, whatever, constitutional carry, just so we can have something that we can, throw at career criminals.
Well, I think it's also like recidivism and keeping career criminals in prison for long periods of time to punish them more for the things that they're doing is not beneficial. I mean, our goal in the judicial system should be recovery. It should be to reintegrate these career criminals back into society as best as possible, not to lock them away and throw away the key. Like, that doesn't benefit anybody. And now there are some people who are just not going to ever change, right?
Yep.
I mean, you got to keep those people away from the local population. But our goal should not be to increase penalties to keep people locked up for longer. That's expending insane amounts of money. We should be putting this money into recuperating our citizens who have gone this bad way, right? We need to bring them back to us and make them quality members of our society. So I think the concept of just punishing people more for things seems ridiculous. We need to reintegrate them, and help them to change what they're doing. And there are a lot of ways that people, argue about how to do that. But I think that's a much healthier way to approach our criminal justice system than just penalize them more and lock them up and throw away the key and forget about them.
I think you would really find interest in seeing or reviewing John Hearn's presentation on crime and criminals and statistics, as far as it touches on some of the things you're touching on there. So if you guys ever have a chance to also connect with John Hearn of Three Pillars Training, and he does a great presentation on crime and criminals and associated statistics as a recently retired, very experienced federal law enforcement officer. But anyway, topic for another time. We got a couple more things here to hit on before we wrap it up. This is out of Michigan. A father whose toddler allegedly shot herself with his gun is the first person to be charged under Michigan's firearms storage law. Prosecutor says the law was passed, I think, just last year. And now we are seeing the first person charged for failing to store his firearms in accordance with that law. His daughter, 2-year-old daughter, shot herself in the head, leaving her in critical condition. So take it away. This is, I think, one that you dug up.
Yeah. So I think that this is a kind of a rough situation here, because we were talking a little bit about before the podcast about how devastating it would be to have something like this happen, and for this to be on your conscience that you messed up so badly that your baby got your gun and shot herself in the head.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, having additional charges piled on top to make things worse, and, I feel like, yes, is that a bad thing that he did? Yes, it was horribly irresponsible, terribly selfish, negligent on so many different levels. But at the same time, like, I can't imagine, like, you're already dealing with that, and then you've got people piling on more things. And the other point that I think is kind of something that kind of stands out to me is here we've got the very first person to be charged on these laws, and now they're using this to make an example, like, hey, you all better watch out. You see what happened to this guy? And that feels unfair to me.
Yeah.
to be made an example of. They're coming after you, piling on extra charges just to make an example out of you. That doesn't seem like a fair judicial system
Yeah.
in my opinion. So I don't know. I kind of struggle with this whole concept a little bit. While I agree that this is super negligent and we need to encourage people not to do this, using this as a what was the term we used? Dis
Deterrent.
Deterrent. Using this as a
Yeah.
deterrent is, I don't know. It doesn't seem like the most logical or the best use of this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I agree. That was exactly what our pre-show conversation was about. Uh, Laws like this are strange to me because they're virtually unenforceable except for after the fact, right? Because I mean, what else? What are you going to do? I mean, are you going to go into people's homes and inspect how they store their guns? No, you're not going to do that. That wouldn't be right or constitutional. Be a problem, with the Fourth Amendment. Uh, and so, you know, so it's only something that you can use. In fact, even one of the sponsors of the bill, co-sponsor, State Senator Kristen McDonald Rivet, said she hoped the law would never be used. Wow. So we passed a law based on a hope. We got to have this law because we got to encourage, we got to have some incentive for people to make sure they're storing their guns safely. Because if not, they will be charged under this law. And I sure hope that doesn't actually have to happen. It's like, what do you think is a bigger deterrent? A law that says, hey, behind your closed doors, within the confines of your private home, you got to store your guns a certain way, or hearing about your neighbor or your child's, school friend as a family member that, has a tragedy occur like this. I mean, stuff like this happens. It gets your attention. And frankly, I think, they talk about how, in fact, this was a quote from that same co-sponsor of the bill. Anytime, oh, excuse me. I'm hopeful with these prosecutions that we raise awareness in the public about the importance of safe storage, and that eventually we'll be able to use the law less and less. And it's like, okay, so you passed a law again to try to legislate people's actions behind closed doors in the privacy of their own homes, with the hope of raising awareness of the importance of safe firearm storage. And we're all about safe firearm storage here at concealedcarry.com. The Concealed Carry podcast have been since the beginning. We sell a number of simple and affordable. We've got a couple of them sitting right over there on a shelf right there of pistol vault products, that because if you own a pistol or a gun, you should store it safely. Like, that's just a fact. Like, we're all about that. But if you want to raise awareness, don't pass a law. Like, you can raise awareness just based on the issue itself. Just share the stories. Like, you anti-gunners are all about stories. Share the stories of how, Johnny Smith, age 3, shot himself because his dad failed to store his gun safely. 7-year-old Kate shot her, neighbor friend because her dad failed to store his guns safely. Like, you can raise awareness around that. You don't need a law to raise awareness on safe firearm storage.
Yeah, or to pile on more charges onto somebody who's
Yeah,
already just lost a child.
Like, exactly. You have already been, and I know it shouldn't have happened in the first place, but you screwed up. You made a devastating error that is life-changing for you, for your family, for everybody around you, for that child. Obviously, they're either dead, or in this case, she's actually alive in critical condition. Looks like she may pull through, but most likely has lost an eye and is not going to be the same ever again. I mean, you have suffered. I'm sorry. I think that's punishment enough.
I agree.
So anyway, final story. This was also one of yours, I think. See which Tennessee gun stores made ATF list of places that sold most firearms used in crime.
Oh, yeah, that is interesting. So I guess the U.S. government's been keeping track, of course, and USA Today put in a Freedom Information Act request, and it brought this information to light. So Federal government has been keeping eyes on which gun stores are selling the most firearms used in crimes. They've identified 47 in Tennessee, and 47 of the 1,300 across the nation, which are on the list. So this has been going on for 2 decades, since 2003, George W. Bush administration. So what is the requirements for getting on this list? Let me see if I can find this here real quick.
Well, they look at time to crime
That's
statistic.
right, it is, yeah.
So they look at, so a gun's used in a crime. It's recovered, at the scene, or, at some point during an investigation, and an arrest is made. And then they basically trace that firearm and see, okay, how long has it been since this was sold by a dealer to ending up in the hands of this individual that committed the crime. So that's how you end up on the list. And then, and really how you, I think it was like the threshold, I think it was if they had 25 of these that fit that profile, then then you as an FFL, as a gun dealer, ended up on the list.
25 situations within 1 year, but over a 3-year period.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know why I can't find it right now.
And what's fascinating too is that this is actually, they say it's a secret list. That's true. This has kind of been known about for a while. We've reported on similar things out of like the city of Chicago, for instance, where we've shared similar stories where that's where this sort of thing has been used quite extensively, is looking at time to crime of guns sold by dealers in Chicago. And there was, I think one time we did a story where it was like 3 or 4 dealers in the Chicago metro that were really like up there high on that list, because they had a lot of those guns ending up in relatively short time frames in the hands of criminals. And so anyway, sorry, continue.
Well, part of those gun shops that are on the list includes Bass Pro Shop, Cabela's, Rural King, and Sportsman's Warehouse. So I think that's kind of interesting. And yeah, the requirements to make the list is the stores have to have at least 25 guns traced to a crime over a year that were purchased within the last 3 years. So that's how you get on the list. And also, interesting of note, in this article, which can be found at commercialappeal.com, they have a map which shows where the gun trace program has been run and where the greatest collection of gun shops are. And it's very, very heavily saturated in the South. Your Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and then the East Coast area. So I think that's kind of interesting. The more rural states, like Montana, Wyoming looks like 0 accounts. North Dakota.
What I think there's some correlation here to just basically to population. I mean, number one, larger population center is going to have more dealers. Typically, you're going to have more guns being sold. You're also going to have higher rates of crime, generally speaking, and so more likely to see guns used in crimes in higher population areas. So I think there's some correlation based on, we see the rural areas, this doesn't seem to be as much of a thing. We don't see as many dealers on this list. And then the high population, especially, I mean, if you look at the map, look at Dallas, look at Houston, look at St. Louis, look at Memphis was one of the big ones. Look at Chicago, right? A couple cities in California, big cities, right? To me, that just says, hey, higher likelihood, higher population, more crime, greater instances where this occurs. So you create a metric that is capturing this data that's it's the same criteria across the board, regardless of where you are measuring. Of course, you're going to have in a higher population area, you're just going to see higher instances where that hits the report. That's just the way I see it. Instead, I think it should probably be more measured on percentage, percentage of, you're a dealer, you sell 500 guns a year, let's say, right? And certain percentage of those ends up meeting this crossing this threshold of, being used in a crime within a short period of time. But meanwhile, you have another dealer that's got that sells 5,000 guns a year. I mean, that sounds like a lot, but maybe it's a Bass Pro. I don't know. Right? Like it should be percentage based.
That should be that.
You know
You're
what I mean?
absolutely right. That makes a lot of
But
sense.
anyway, that's what it is. It's what do you do about that? I don't know, but the government has secret lists.
They also something also kind of interesting looking at this map here. It seems like there seem to be a decent number of these gun shops seem to be located on borders, like Nevada and California. A lot of the gun shops that are flagged here in Nevada are right there on the border of California, and then you also have in New York. There's no accounts of any gun shops falling into this category, but you can see all around the border of New York are all gun shops that have made this list. So I wonder if it's because people are crossing over into Nevada or into other places near New York, purchasing the gun there, and then going committing crimes and across the state.
Yeah, it's hard to know for sure. I think all those things, but I mean, eh, what do you do about it? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And here's the thing: people sometimes this stuff it hits the media in this sort of it comes across as though like these are illicit gun dealers selling to the wrong people, and that they're somehow complicit in putting guns out in the streets in the hands of criminals. And certainly we know that there are bad apples, just like there are in anything in life. That there's probably gun dealers that are knowingly selling guns to people they know are just taking them out and putting them on the streets. And certainly I have no problem with going after dealers that knowingly, complicitly do stuff like that. But darn well that most of these are not in that category. I mean, just looking at the number of Bass Pro shops, there's like 6 of them in the state of Texas. Why is that? Well, Bass Pro is a huge retailer of firearms, so of course there's a higher probability that at some point a customer comes in, buys a gun, passes the background check, all of that, and then at some point they choose to turn around and sell it privately, let's say, or they give it to somebody or whatever, and it ends up in somebody's hands that goes and commits a crime. I mean, well, Bass Pro is a huge retailer. It just makes sense. There's going to be more instances where that occurs. Does that mean that they are complicitly doing that? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. It's a large corporation that probably has a number of different people working the counter on a given day. It's far less likely to have some kind of like it's not like the dealer is in on this gig to sell guns and put them out in the streets in the hands of criminals. Is I guess what is my point.
I wonder what I agree with that. I wonder what the reasoning would be with the saturation of the South. Like, what is it about that makes it?
Probably just more gun ownership, period.
Well, also, I was looking through, this is a pretty interesting, if you want to go and read the list of all the gun shops that made this list, you can go do that. And I found it interesting because now I'm kind of looking through the Colorado companies. It's way down at the bottom. But I'm looking at the Colorado companies, and I know some of these, some of these gun shops here. And 2 of them are Bass Pro shops.
Mm-hmm.
One in Northfield here in Denver, and then one down in Colorado Springs down south.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's pretty interesting. And that would make total sense what you're saying. Yep, here's Sportsman Warehouse. 4 of the Sportsman's Warehouse here in Colorado have made the list.
Mm-hmm.
Bass Pro, 3 of those have made the list. Like what you're saying about quantity, that's got to be a big reason for that. And I think you're absolutely right about percentages.
Yeah, I think that the premise is flawed in how they are gathering and rating the data and basically putting these dealers on a quote unquote naughty list. Because if you're a higher volume dealer, I mean, it's just a higher probability that you're going to end up on this list.
Yeah, definitely.
Simple as that. So anyway, well, we're out of time for today's episode. That brings us to a conclusion and a wrap up here. Folks, we appreciate you being a part of this with us. Hopefully you appreciate that we bring to you some of these legislative issues and other industry news matters so that you can stay informed and up to date on such things. If you don't appreciate this, let us know. But I mean, the only reason we keep doing it is because we feel like people appreciate it.
Yeah. Why are you listening to this if
yeah.
you don't appreciate us? That's weird.
Yeah. Well, but just the concept of doing the news and legislative updates, episodes. So anyway, feedback for the podcast at concealedcarry.com. Shoot us an email, message us. We'll see that and respond to that. Appreciate your support of our sponsors. Today's episode sponsored by ccwsafe.com and also ksgarmory.com. And guys, we're going to check on out of here. Doc, what you got?
Be ready for whatever the mountain throws at you.
I dig it. And with that, I will throw out the reminder, as we always do, to remember to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.